Welcome to Big Hearted Indy, where we empower men in Indianapolis to forge deep connections and impactful lives through authentic friendship and service. Join us as we explore personal growth, community leadership, and the transformative power of living out our faith in action. The podcast is produced by Citizen 7, and it is hosted by Greg Enas, Don Palmer, and I am Chris Spangle. Today our guests are Kraig Kinchen and Anderson White. We have a special introduction today. Greg and Don are outside of the room, and with us are Kelly and Trey. Kraig, why don't you tell them why Trey is here today?
Sure. So Kelly Reese is our outstanding manager of programs with our organization, 100 Black Men of Indianapolis. And we were just talking in the office, and she said her son, Trey, had just graduated from Traders Point Academy, or Christian school, and asked what he was interested in. And she said he was interested in sound engineering. And so we just said, well, we have this podcast coming up. I'm sure he could learn something about sound engineering if he just comes along and checks it out. So invited Trey to come along, just looking for opportunities for him to grow.
Yeah, and so that is what they do at 100 Black Men of Indianapolis. And Trey, what are you learning today? Have I taught you anything yet? Hold it up here. First thing, hold it. There you go.
Wow. I would say the one thing I've learned so far, it's better to have like a structure of some kind, as tall as this bed frame is, and have it like really, what did you say?
Absorb the sound.
Absorb the sound.
What
to
is
make
your
it sound
enemy?
better.
What is your enemy in sound?
Corners,
flat surfaces. That's right. So behind me, you can see this is not a green screen. This is actually an 11-foot by 6-foot moss wall with what do you call them? Mattress toppers attached to a bed frame, and that's what makes this room sound good. So yeah, that's it took a whole month to build this. So that's a little bit about the behind the scenes of the studio. So Kelly, why was it important for you to bring Trey today?
Lifelong learning, just continuous learning. He is a recent graduate from Traders Point, 2 days post graduation, but just knowing that, hey, as you're pursuing, you have an opportunity to make connection, to observe, to learn. And I'm a proponent of just continuous education. Yeah. So Kraig mentioned they were doing it. I'm like, hey, just come and sit in and watch. And so, yeah, absolutely value just having opportunity to meet, to connect with connect the real world, and to learn something.
Great. The other benefit is now I know Trey, and
That's
Trey
right.
knows me.
That was
right.
actually the number one.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So that's an important part of mentoring too.
Absolutely.
Is just building a network.
Absolutely. So we're very big on helping students understand the importance of building relationships, and that's one of the things that is emphasized in Citizen 7. So you see a group of people and you think about how you can provide value by building relationships rather than how you can extract value from those people who are gathered. And so I think this is just one way to sort of demonstrate that.
All right, so we are going to pause. You're not going to know this if you're watching this later, but if you're online, we're going to take a quick pause and bring in Don and Greg. So Kelly, Trey, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Appreciate it. All right, and we are back. Thanks so much to Don and Greg for giving Trey the opportunity to come on, and now they can say, look, Trey can go brag on all his friends. He's been on the Big Hearted Indy podcast. So Don, Greg, welcome. Why don't you introduce Anderson and Kraig and tell us a little bit about why they're here today and why you wanted to talk to them?
Well, first of all, these two guys have big-time careers, are involved in incredible companies, yet have an incredible passion to serve, and not just to serve, but specifically to raise up youth. We've had a focus on friendships, and I talked to these guys before the meeting, and 20-some years that they've known each other. So we're just delighted to have them here with us.
So Kraig, Anderson, either one of you can start. How did you two meet? Let's just start there.
So we have a mutual friend, Ed Magruder, and Ed is just one of the best people you will ever meet. And he used to worship with Anderson and others at Light of the World. Yeah, I met Ed.
Magruders and us, we had met at church. And, Ed's one of those, as Kraig talked about, building good relationships. And so our relationship and friendship was built and centered around our focus on God and young adults coming up. And so he loved that. And then as he went out and connected with others, he said, hey, you guys got to connect because, we've all got this commonality of serving God and spreading the gospel. And so that he connected us with the Kinchens. And it's just been a blessing for, like I said, over almost 20 years of trying to connect. We've done some Bible studies together and fellowships and just trying to, like you said, build that relationship around godly people.
Well, let's just start with your backgrounds. Let's start with Kraig.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your story?
So my story is I grew up in Louisiana, left after college, and sort of long story short, I wound up marrying my wife, who is a North Central graduate, and she wanted to come on back home to get have a little help with the raising the kids, and so my in-laws were just tremendous in that regard. My background, I went to medical school, did my residency in internal medicine, but then I did a fellowship essentially in health services research. And I tell people my interest was in measuring what works. And so I wound up having a 22-year career at Eli Lilly. About half that time was in an area called health outcomes, where we think about the value of medications and research to support that value proposition, understand how that medicine works in the real world. And then the other half of my time at Lilly was supervising teams running clinical trials, again, in the randomized trial setting, measuring what works. So I did that until August of 2023, and now I've on to my second career.
Which is?
So my second career is I am the executive director of an organization called 100 Black Men of Indianapolis. That is an organization that focuses on mentoring youth. We've been around in the city for 40 years, and it's just been just a tremendous blessing to be able to work with men so dedicated to helping out youth in the community and to be exposed to so many talented youth over this last year and a half that I've been in this role.
So, Greg, did you run into Kraig at Eli Lilly?
Not too much, but I saw that stock price appreciate while he was there. So we really love Kraig. But no, we never had the opportunity to actually work with each other. I had met him maybe once or twice, but I really got to know Kraig when I found out he was my neighbor in Pike Township, watching him walk up and down Marsh Road with his headphones on, taking important phone calls.
So, Anderson, tell us a little bit about your story.
Yes, originally from Detroit, but we moved here when I was about 9 years old, and I'm a North Central grad, much like your wife, proud North Central grad, and went to IU, and Kraig went on to med school. When I finished IU, funny story, I had applied to about 8 med schools, and I had a week to get my application into AMCAS, and I went to the post office in Bloomington and said, hey, I've got a week to get this in. Is that going to be enough time? They said, no, if I were you, I would pay and get 2-day guarantee. I said, absolutely. So I paid like $18 so that,
It's a fortune.
Yeah, right. At that time, right. For a college student, $18, right. To guarantee. And believe it or not, the post office lost my application.
Really?
No.
True story. And so after a couple of weeks, I'm like, it seems like I should get some type of confirmation that they're processing my application. So I went in and called them and said, hey, I submitted it. Said, dude, we don't have it. And went back to the post office, got with the manager, and they were like, we lost it. We it's our fault. He was ready to write a formal letter to AMCAS, and AMCAS, we got on the phone with AMCAS, and they said, there's really nothing you can do. You've missed all the deadlines except Indiana. So now you've got, so I, at the time I'm like, I'm going to get into one of these 8, maybe I should. Now it's riding on IU, and IU said, no, we want your MCAT score to be a little bit higher. So at the time I was devastated. Now I tell people, I remember saying a prayer, and I was going to be the first male in my family to graduate from college. And I remember saying a prayer in my dorm room saying, God, I recognize I could not get here without you. And I want you today. I probably haven't served you the way I needed to in college. I said, today, I want you to direct my path. And it was almost like I looked back and it was like God said, okay, well, then the med school wasn't supposed to be. Let me move that out. Let me move the girlfriend out the way. And so now I'm in the shambles of life. Like, what do I do? So I had met a guy, Bill Mays.
Yeah.
He was a fraternity brother, and we were at a meeting together. And a guy, one of his mentors, said, "Hey, well, what are you going to do?" I said, "Well, supposed to be going to med school, but that's kind of up in shambles." He said, "Well, hey, your degree's in biology and chemistry. Why don't you meet, Bill Mays? He runs a chemical distribution company." So got literally an on-the-spot interview. And I told him, I said, "Well, I graduate in a month. I'll bring you a resume." And walked in just to give a resume. And sure enough, he was walking out and said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I told you I would give you a resume." And he wrote something on it. And I've been with Mays Chemical 31 years now. So I literally,
fantastic.
yeah. And so with that, grew up in light of the world. And I always felt like, growing up, church was a foundation for me. So when I got back, I said, well, man, let me figure out a way I can give back. And, I'm a pretty youthful guy. So I said, well, let me connect with the youth ministry. And so for many years, they had started a mime dance group. And I helped out with that and just really got involved.
Craig just learned that.
Right. Yeah. What? I mean, that's really where I first got it. Is they asked me, Bishop Benjamin asked me to kind of oversee these young men. And so at the time, they always had a full-time youth minister. And the guy that they had, they kind of promoted him up to associate, went through a couple that didn't work out. And my wife comes to me and says, "Anderson, you're at this time really the only person that the youth really trust. You've got that relation. You need to go to Bishop Benjamin and tell him that you'll be the interim until they find somebody." And I said, "All right, I can do that. Maybe a year or so, and 20 years later, I'm still the youth director. So it's been a wonderful story, a wonderful journey. I'm just a volunteer. I've worked, like I said, I'm a corporate account exec for Mays. I call on accounts like Eli Lilly and Pfizer, and but God has worked it where I've been able to balance the two, and Mays Chemical has always been about giving back to the community. So I was blessed to end up at an organization that applauds me working with youth, and for these last 20 years, I've just been able to kind of balance it and make it work. So,
well, Anderson, I can tell why you delivered that resume hand by hand to Bill Mays, because you don't trust the post office.
No, yeah.
Exactly. Absolutely. I'm going to make sure. Right.
There. And secondly, I hope Craig has thanked you for leaving that med school slot
open for him.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
So,
that's absolutely right.
Right. God opened up the door.
What a beautiful story.
That's
of God's providence. That's great.
I'd love to hear if you had, as both of you are from out of town and moved here, before you moved to Indiana, did you have any preconceived notions about Indiana before? And then how would you rate Indiana now? How do you see Indianapolis at this point in your life?
I'm from the South, and I told people that in visiting my future in-laws that the pace was familiar. And this has been such a tremendous community. A great corporate environment at Lilly. Couldn't have worked for a better company. I'd say could not have raised our kids in a better community. So lots of opportunities, lots of wonderful people to interact with, and so it's been just a huge blessing to have been able to raise a family here.
Yeah, and I'm born in Detroit. My dad was a professor at UWM, so we lived in Milwaukee for about 4 or 5 years. Came here when I was 9, and I felt it was about a similar pace coming from Milwaukee to here. But same thing. I just felt like growing up, I had a lot of positive memories, whether it was school, church, your neighborhood. And that's one of the reasons my parents told me that they moved here was the upside of where at that time, it was the late 70s, Indianapolis was really on the uprise.
Mm-hmm.
And they just thought it was perfect timing. It was a great opportunity for my dad, job-wise and career-wise. But that was really the thing that brought us here was there was a lot of talk about, Indianapolis is this great place to raise a family, good community, and it's really on the uprise. So I think we got in right when it started shifting up,
In what ways did your parents or grandparents, their values or priorities shape you and what you're doing now, both in church and in your professional life?
So my grandmother, we called her Mama. Her name was Bernice, but she didn't want to be called Bernice, so we all had to call her Mama B. But she was, really hardcore put God first in your life. So growing up, I mean, that's what you heard. And I'm blessed enough to say I had a grandmother that didn't just preach it, she lived it every day. The way she loved people, you saw unconditional love, examples shown every day. And then Light of the World was just a great place for us to land, because you just saw loving people. And that just kind of really molded me, growing up, is seeing so many examples of people being friendly and loving, and really in that unconditional of just doing it because God's love was in them. And so I just remember seeing that and being surrounded by that. And I think that just shaped me to want to give back. I think that's what drove me to the youth, is I just realized the good people that God had put in my life to help mold me. And I just wanted the opportunity for some other young person to experience, the blessings that I saw growing up.
I'd say similar in that my grandmother was just a huge figure in our lives, and faith was very important. I can still kind of see her sitting in the front room praying and Bible open
right,
and singing songs. But one of the interesting things I learned later was that before my father was born, she prayed to God to send her a servant. And that's who my dad became. So my dad went into medicine. My mom was a teacher. My grandmother was a teacher. But my dad is really the most selfless person I had ever met. And so he used to take my brother and I on rounds with him on Sundays after church. We would go see patients. And no matter whether it was what time of day it was, if we were there late at night in the hospital, if he saw a kid, he would always stop and say, "Are you reading and writing and learning? Are you reading and writing and learning?" Over and over. And over time, you'd start to hear that these kids really took this seriously. And so to this day, he is, even in his 80s, still mentoring kids, still working with 100 Black Men in Louisiana. And so to me, that emphasis on encouragement, that emphasis on faith is really what sort of connects me to him. I still remember being late for nursery school because he was, we're gonna go talk to a 5th grade class somewhere. It's like, oh, okay, sure. And so I just see it as this is what I'm supposed to be doing, and that's where the joy and sense of fulfillment sort of comes from.
With your friendship, as now you've been together for decades, how has your friendship brought 1 + 1 into a multiplicative? It's animated you beyond what you would be able to be and do apart from each other if you hadn't connected. How do you support
I think it's really just been a confirmation, because, like I said, we were just kind of connected to the Magruder, hey, great couple. But as you walked along that journey, you started seeing that we were really connecting as far as that same, passion for youth. And I think, God just kind of puts that discernment that, hey, this person's like walking that same path. And so I told him our goal is to find ways that we can in the future connect more together with our organizations. They do some wonderful things, financing, preparing kids for school. And so we've said, how can we merge, some of these programs together? But I was saying before that it's just been great for us to be able to exchange information and help each other understand in today's world, how can we better serve the youth and mentor the youth? What are you seeing? What's good, what's bad, what's worked for you? So it's a great exchange of information at this point for us to just sometimes talk and Kraig, that's what I love about, like you said, you see that passion. And so when you start talking about youth, his ears perk up because he wants to know, how can I be a better mentor? When he took that role, you could tell it wasn't about the position. How can we better serve the young people that are going to come through this door?
Well, let's take that, Anderson and Kraig. What is working and what's not with 100 Black Men and with Black men in general? We want to learn what's going on.
So I still remember, so Anderson and I, as he mentioned, we had been in a couple of Bible studies together and really appreciated how important faith was. And I remember we had a conversation, this is probably like 6 or 7 years ago. We were out with our wives in the Carmel area. And we started talking about how the nature of mentoring was changing a bit as students' needs were changing. And that conversation really, sometimes when you're with your people, I was like, man, this guy gets what is driving me. And I think what I've learned since that conversation and through my work on the board at Elevate with Aaron's story is that at the end of the day, relationships are the biggest component of our work. That students need relationships, and they need to be connected with men or women who are willing to pour into them so that they can have trust and move forward. That the challenges may be different, but ultimately students need adults to mentor them, to help them navigate those challenges.
And I think the key about the mentoring, what I see is a lot of mentoring groups and churches that I work with, they fall short because they're kind of event orientated. And just much like us, our walk with God was a journey. We talked about how your parents walked you along, or people, and a lot of times I see today people miss the mark that, hey, I tell people we used to do a lock-in that became very popular, and people would be so excited because they'd be like, you guys had 1,000 kids there. That's just great. But from our mindset, the vision of it was hopefully, we had 1,000 kids, but how many kids are going to stay that we can walk along? Because this one night isn't going to, hopefully just going to turn a light bulb on. But, or if when a young person gives their life to Christ, our youth group, we look at it as like, okay, now the journey begins. We've turned a light on that they want to jump on the team of God as their Lord and Savior, but that's not the end all be all. Now we've got to help guide them along on how you navigate Christianity. And I see that a lot of organizations have just made it an event. And that's what Kraig and I realized that day. It was going to be more than that. It's more work. It's getting your hands dirty. It's a day-to-day and maybe year-to-year type journey to get somebody from A to B, and then realizing that we're just there to serve and hopefully guide them along. And then, as the Bible says, somebody else might water and the Holy Spirit's going to do the rest. But a lot of people, I think, fall short of just wanting to do events or activities and realizing those are great. No, not taking away, but it's going to take more consistency than just an event once a year and say, oh, we did a great event. But what we do the other days, that young man doesn't have a father. Who's going to teach him?
Anderson and Kraig, maybe a story, you can just keep it with the first name, of maybe a youth that has impacted you as much as you impacted them. What would be,
I will say the one story this year that has really stuck with me was, and I think I've probably told some of you guys before, but we have a young man who is doing essentially an apprenticeship program through Employ Indy with our organization. And when he started with us, he was a junior in high school, and it just was not going well at all. This was a couple months before I got there, and Kelly, who some of you guys just met, and Joseph, who's also in our office, said, rather than give up on this student, we're going to pour in. So they just started doubling down. Now this young man, he calls Joseph uncle, and Joseph calls him nephew, because the relationship has gotten that tight. But what we saw was, once he saw that support, this guy, instead of just showing up during the week when he was supposed to show up, now he's riding the bus with video equipment on the weekends to get out to our programs to do this work. And then over time, you just start to see his mind just open up. And now, he's actually headed to college, and he wasn't thinking about college at all. And that story made me think about something, Anderson, you and I had talked about some years ago, which is that the level of exposure that many young Black males have is much less than we think it
That's right.
is, because maybe we're thinking from our lens like,
right.
oh yeah, well, We'd go to church and we'd see the principal and we'd see the plumber and we'd see the HVAC guy and we'd see the engineer and the doctor. And those people were all in that church.
Yeah.
Now, a student like this may not have that community. They may be geographically isolated, economically isolated. Maybe there's no man in the home. Maybe there's no other man who's part of the family. And we assume that they know things that they just don't know. And so the talent of the student is there all along. This guy is ridiculously smart, but his exposure had been so limited. And so we're losing kids, talented kids, because we're not exposing them to things that we think that they're being exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
I just to follow up on that, I grew up in Plainfield. I grew up in a very white suburbanite community, and I didn't have any black classmates, right? And I've learned over time that is a blind spot in regards to many things going on in the black community. I mean, what would you say to somebody who lives north of 96 or out in Hendricks County, or why get involved and why get in a community that you may not initially identify with?
So I'll try to be brief with this. Ultimately, I think relationships are relationships, and I think we can complicate this, but ultimately, I think when people meet the students we work with, whether those are black kids or other kids through other organizations, ultimately, they just need relationships. And when you see how much talent is out there and you think about the future of the community and that we're essentially as a community, we are wasting talent. I mean, it's when you leave a Saturday morning or a Sunday afternoon with some of these kids, you're just like, oh my gosh, those kids are so perceptive. Yet, if they don't have mentorship, they could go one way or the other. And I know you see that because you're actually undertelling your story, because you can see Anderson anywhere in the community. I saw you like at IMA last week. Oh, I'm here because such and such is taking their prom pictures, or you'll be at somebody's soccer game. I mean, it's just endless. And you're on your second generation of students, because some of the students that you mentored early in your career, now you're mentoring their kids. And that degree of trust that he's built up is, I think, the lesson for all of us, right? It's that we just have to stop and make time. We were doing in Sunday school, Mark
Craig,
10.
I want to hit something that he said, though, that I think is key in all this is, and Craig said it, but it's what you're asking is, I think our biggest downfall is not seeing through their lens. And that's only done by relationship and understanding and patience and grace. But a lot of times, even in the black community, we have to recognize from house to house, sometimes you'll look at somebody through your lens, and I'd have to say, Craig and I came from a pretty blessed circumstances.
That's right.
We didn't come from the abuse and so we understand that. But sometimes you can then look at someone else and say, wait, why aren't they getting it?
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't they stepping up? And God had to show me it's because you're looking through your lens.
Mm-hmm.
This person, like you said, maybe didn't have anybody, or they came. I've got kids that have come from abusive situations. So we've got to have a therapist and intervene to heal that, because their mind is just stuck in that trauma. I don't have any stories like that. So for me to expect them to navigate the same way I did is really unfair. But I think whether you go cross cultures, cross community, I think that's the problem with America. Where everyone is looking at everyone else's circumstances through your own lens. And the more we can build relationships and see that we're really all the same. We all have a lot of the same trials and things, but let me understand how I can help you. Oh, and let me understand your lens. But I think, as you said, you no fault of your own. You came from Plainfield, so you guys have a certain lens that's going to be different from Brightwood. But I remember when I was in college, I stayed in Briscoe at IU, and I had my own room the first year. And there was a Caucasian guy that came from the upper suburbs, rich kid from northern suburbs of Chicago, and him and I built a relationship the whole year, and we laughed And he was shocked that I knew some of the rock music he had, and I was shocked that he knew some of the rap. But I remember at the end of our last day, he came up, he said, man, I'm so glad that you were the guy next to me. I said, well, why is that? He said, to be honest with you, I had never met a black guy until I came to college. And he said, so everything that I was taught and learned was either from somebody else or what media showed me. And he said, you completely broke the stigmas that I had by seeing that we are so much alike and that we're brothers, you know. And I thought that was just telling of this is how we have to be, is just building relationships so we understand one another. But I think America's biggest problem is everyone's looking at everyone else's circumstances through our own lens. And so we fight and we debate because it's like, you should get it like this. You know what I'm saying? And you're sitting there saying, yeah, but he doesn't come from the same lens as you. And I think that was key what he said when Kraig saw that, and we had that conversation of, wait a minute, we're looking at these kids through our lens. We've got to start understanding these kids and helping them navigate through their lens. And I think that answers your question. The more we build relationships and see, then the better you can minister and help somebody and mentor somebody, because now I understand what your lens is. And
so Anderson, how about a youth that's impacted you?
Oh, yeah. The one that sticks out, that it was probably about, this young lady is now probably reaching 30, but her name was Jada, and at 12 years old, I remember we were in the gym, and there's just something you just saw special about this individual. And I said, what's your name? And, and then it turned out we were connected because her grandmother and my mother were good friends. And she said, oh, that's such and such granddaughter. I said, no, I didn't know that. Well, this young woman came from hard circumstances. She stayed with her grandmother because the household was just very concerning. And I remember that I really took her under my wing. And what God showed me through her was, when you're going to mentor, it can't always be about the hand claps. And so as she got to high school and faced challenges, I forget what she did, but she did something that was kind of embarrassing, and people came and said, get with your girl, And I remember we lit into her, and I went home, and I'm like, man, I'm so embarrassed that she would do that. And I remember God telling me then don't mentor. Because if you're just doing it for when you can say, oh, look, we got her grades up, or, oh, we got her into college. But here was that time where she fell short, and I'm darn near ready to say, and I remember God, really had to check me and said that, check yourself, because this is her lens, and it's not always going to be pretty. And so when we're mentoring people, we have to understand it's not always going to be pretty. We're going to have to help through the hand claps and the times where we got to go in the closet and pray. And I think that was just monumental to me, because it just really self-checked me on, why are you doing this? And are you doing it for God to get the glory or for you to get the glory? And it was more of a self-check for me and where I was at. And like I said, that young lady's, we ended up getting her off to college, but like you said, it wasn't easy, and it wasn't always hand claps every day that came along with that journey.
It makes me think of, I mentored a young man named Aaron at Starfish Initiative, and he'd gone to North Central, and he had the best dad you'd ever see in your whole life. He was a single dad and 2 kids. And long story short, you have to be selected into the Starfish program. And, I didn't get him there. In other words, I didn't get him to college. I didn't. Yeah. And there was such a kind of a part of failure on my part of going, boy, if I'd only done X and Y. And the good Lord said to me, is this your ego? Like, in other words,
that's right.
Yeah. You wanted the success. You wanted the, hey, I got him there, and that's my guy. And the Lord said, hey, you know what? I love him, and I'll deal with him in his time. You need to get your ego.
and maybe all your job was to initially plant something.
Yeah.
That, like that scripture says, somebody else will come along. And that's what God had to show me, is that, hey, maybe your job was just to plant the word of God. But you, like you said, I was at the place where I want to be able to plant the word, water it,
Yeah.
you know, and that's with her that I remember vividly God
Yeah,
saying
that's
that,
great.
this is about you. You're disappointed because your ego is crushed because you want to be able to say, I want another hand clap.
Yeah.
And this isn't about it. It's about I'm getting the glory, but you're just supposed to show love, show a blueprint that might turn on the light switch like Kraig is doing, finding ways. And if you did all you could do and you showed unconditional love, then maybe it wasn't your job to get her all the way through the journey. You were maybe a step in that journey.
So I struggle, and I'm sure other people watching, sometimes I'm not that motivated to help other people. Right? I mean, if you say it's about you, it is. I mean, in other words, I'm a selfish person by nature, right? And you talked a little about, I go back to the scripture, faith comes from hearing the word of God. And in both of your cases, your grandmother. She weren't an evangelist or such, but she was faithful, right?
Yeah.
And that word was there. But then when you left college, you had this prayer of, Lord, let me be, use me or
use me. Yeah.
So how can we get better at surrendering, or how can we get better? Someone said, well, this Citizen 7, it's just a Kiwanis. I said, well, it is the farthest thing from Kiwanis. I mean, in other words, it is about us trying to get the right communication with our maker so that we could hear how we're supposed to unconditionally love. What would you say to folk that maybe this spiritual thing doesn't come that easy?
I would say for me, one, I feel whatever organization, you won't see and feel, from my perspective, the blessing without some type of sacrifice. And a lot of times we want successful mentoring organizations and everyone wants it to be comfortable. I come once a week, doesn't really take out of my golf schedule. And, that even in my church, a lot of the people will come and say, Anderson, you're doing a great thing. How can I get involved? And I say, oh, well, this is what we need, and they're fine until, oh, well, wait a minute. Mondays, I usually watch football or, and I'm saying, okay, at some point though, godly giving is sacrificial giving. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to have to give up something if you want something better for somebody else. Mm-hmm. And when you do that and you see, much like Kraig, when you see the impact or you see that there was a kid that light switch was off and went on, I mean, that just brings such a joy, as they talk about the fruit of the Spirit. I mean, there's an internal joy and peace that this world just doesn't give when you see that you were able to impact somebody's life and know that, hey, this person was in a dark space and they might not be where they need, but you see that light switch come on, just like he said, the young man, to see this man was willing to get on a bus. And, I remember we had guys that literally, we had a young man that was homeless. We didn't even know it at the time. And he would walk 2 miles to get to Light of the World. And we ended up getting him into college, and he's a brick mason and sells a bit. So when you see that, it just brings a joy of knowing that I did God's will. Mm-hmm. And it impacted somebody's life that now believes in God, or I changed the course, that they see that this God was real. And I think that's really what our grandmothers did. Yeah. We didn't realize it, but we just saw such an example that it made us realize there must be something to this Jesus, because we saw, these unconditional grandmothers loving not only you, and I want to be you, but I saw, the community.
That's right.
What I saw my grandmother do for neighbors and youth, and so you didn't just see it with you, but you saw them touching other lives. And I think that example just made you see that, oh wow, there's something to this God, but you won't see it unless you walk it yourself. I think it got our attention, but then when we started doing it, that's when it becomes fulfilling.
So maybe it's an honest prayer of, Lord, I don't want to sacrifice. I don't want to do this. Help my unbelief. Help, give me courage to, even in like a really small thing, to somehow make a sacrifice. I don't know, Kraig, thoughts?
So we have our motto with 100 Black Men is what they see is what they'll be. And we
What a great
often
motto.
think about that in terms of what the kids see is what they'll be, like expose them to all these things. But one of the neat things about the organization is that what we see as mentors, not just from the kids, but with people who have been mentoring a long time, transforms us. So we have a guy, Robert Haley, who runs our team mentoring program. This guy, if you hear him talk about the team mentoring program, which is 5th through 9th grade young men at Big Brothers Big Sisters, his voice almost always cracks. He is not there for himself, and he's not there for any accolades.
Right.
We have other men who are there like that, and you look at them and you say, aha, they are here on a Saturday morning or a Sunday afternoon, and it has nothing to do with their resume.
Right.
Right? And so once you get that, you start thinking differently. And I mentioned this before, but Greg, we had a conversation at Starbucks after I got involved at Citizen 7, right after I left Lilly. And I said, Greg, you want people to come to this? Well, who are you looking for? And you said, we're looking for the guy who doesn't see a group of men getting together and thinks about how they can extract value,
Right.
but how they can provide value. And it hit me. I said, boy, every time I go to Citizen 7, somebody asks me how they can help me, how they can help my organization. And that has been a huge force for me, like modeling that it's not about me at all. And there's no resume.
Because that's a big thing. And when I told him when he took on the position, I said, I am so excited because you are going to change the environment in the face of 100 Black Men. Because honestly, and I know he would confirm it, there are individuals that they were in it for their resume.
Mm-hmm.
It looks good. I have a friend, and they were saying, well, I see you working with youth. Man, that's great. He said, oh yeah, I'm going for job interviews and I got to have this on my resume. And I remember me and my friend was like, that's the only reason you're doing this? Mm-hmm. It's because you're building it looks great, but you're doing it at the end for your resume. And I think there's a lot of people that do things for them to feel good, or it looks good that I'm supposed to give back, as opposed to, as he said, it's got to be in your heart that I'm not here for I want to see somebody else life be transformed. And I think that's what Kraig is saying. You have to get, and that's what, when Kraig, I said, Kraig, I said, 100 Black Men's going to go to
no, you're good.
I'm good. 100 Black Men's going to go to new heights, because you're going to infuse this new spirit of, hey guys, we're not here to build resumes or to see who I can rub shoulders with and connect with. We're here to transform lives. And I think that's where we ultimately individually have to get to.
Yeah. As we close out here and get ready for some questions I get here, but just want to know, how are we doing in moving the needle in Indianapolis, leveraging relationships to create a vision and provide tools to young Black men, young men in general, around a vision for economic flourishing, a vision for developing a strong family through marriage and children, developing a sense of place to love their neighbors as themselves. How are we doing here? And what would your call to our audience and to me and Don be to get us going further in that direction?
So I'd say two things. I'd say number one, and I would recommend people, this book of Boys and Men by Richard Reeves was very impactful for me, because it's not just Black youth or brown youth, white youth, it's all youth. Mm-hmm. We are not serving our young men the way they need to be served. And the young men are falling behind in so many areas, not just college enrollment, but deaths of despair. This is a huge issue. And I think as a community, not that we don't pay attention to the young women, and our 100 Black Men has programs for young women as well, but we have to recognize that we're falling short in terms of what we're providing to young men. And then the second thing I'd say is just that we have to try to make opportunities to give back as accessible as possible. So for the young man who is raising a family and has 3 kids and has to go to 2 soccer games and a school play and dance, like how can we say, hey, I know you can't come every Saturday, but let's start here. Can you come and read a book on October 12th to these kids?
Can you pick up somebody?
Can you pick,
Yeah.
right? And then it gets into your spirit. And so I think we have to find more ways to engage. I am convinced in walking around this community and talking to people that it's not a deficit of spirit. This is a wonderful community, and I meet great people every day. We have to help fit opportunities that allow them to give what they can give in a meaningful way.
That's beautiful. Anderson, any?
I think he said that would be the one thing. We've got the wisdom is there, but we've got to become more sacrificial. And I work with other church ministries all the time, and I'm just outdone sometimes where I'll be like, oh, where was so-and-so? And oh, he didn't have a ride. And I'm sitting there saying, well, nobody, you go to a 1,000-member church, nobody could go pick him up. And I'm literally saying that like, there's 1,000 members in your church.
Yeah.
How this is that important. Nobody had the time. And so it was better just to leave him at home away from the wisdom because nobody had time to pick him up. And I see that all the time. I'm doing a youth event this Friday, and I know I'll see that where was so-and-so? Oh, well, yeah, he just didn't have a ride. And so I, challenged our community that, once again, godly giving has got to be sacrificial. We got to give up some time, get a little uncomfortable, but you'll see that's when we'll move that needle the way we want. When everyone says, as you said, everyone might not be able to do. I love how you said, hey, where do I fit in? I believe if you earnestly seek God, he will find that sweet spot. Like you said, you might not be able to do what Craig's doing, but there's something, and I remember when my wife asked me to be the interim, I really didn't want to do it because at that time I was still trying to pursue a professional soccer career. We had a local soccer team. I had almost made the cuts. They said I could come work out with them. I'm like, hey, if I work out with these guys, they're going to see. And I remember saying that if I do this, I'm not going to be able to do both. And I loved being where I was at because it was comfortable. I didn't have to be accountable. I was just a volunteer. If I show up, good. And I knew if I did, but I felt God calling me that you're needed here.
All in.
Yeah, you're needed. And I'm so glad I made that decision. But it cost me something.
There you go.
For me. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's what everyone has to do is say, it's going to have to cost me something if we're going to move that needle. But the wisdom, like you said, the spirit, the community, we have it. We just got to find ways to get it to the people that.
So I am a father of a 6-year-old girl, 2-year-old boy, and one due in 3 weeks, a little girl. And yeah, I know. Citizen 7. I grew up with some internet, but not this internet, right? And I wondered, as we start to get into adolescence and things get more challenging, because when they're 5, it's kind of easy. What advice would you have for young parents and what you see every day? What are 2 or 3 things that young parents like me need to think about in terms of being a good parent and avoiding some of the issues that you see in your work?
I'll say real quick, one thing that I have to discuss with particularly preteen is that because of what you said, a lot of parents underestimate what their kids are exposed to. So, for example, when, I was 9, 10 years old, I remember watching, Laverne and Shirley and Happy Days, and very innocent shows. And so a lot of times parents will say, oh, my kids aren't ready for that discussion. And I'm sitting there saying, they go to school, don't they? Somebody has a phone. And so I would just say, be prepared that because of technology, the world exposes our kids, and I mean to things that sometimes they don't need to see earlier than our generation where we didn't have, phones. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have internet. So it was much easier for our parents to kind of keep us in this innocent space, and with my daughter, I haven't, we both have kids in college, but it was much different with her. We had to have conversations and be aware earlier that things that she is hearing about the world and seeing in the world that might not be godly is at a much faster and earlier clip than how it was with us.
Yeah, starting in kindergarten, apparently.
No, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Last month.
And I'm seeing a lot of parents fall asleep because they're thinking, we don't, that my kids aren't seeing what they come from a good. Yes, they do in your home. But we had to my daughter's friends loved me because I was the guy that you can always come to my house. So in the neighborhood, they knew on the weekends they could come. I'm going to order pizza. But my thing was I can control my household.
Mm-hmm.
But I was finding when my daughter went to such and such household, I can't control what music's being played or, what the environment was. And so we had to be aware of that. So we had to ask questions. So what went on there, and so I created a space in my home just so I could create a safe space for everyone. So I would just say to parents, be aware that technology in today's world creates opportunity for their ears and eyes to maybe see things that, with us, we didn't see till we were 16, 17. Now in kindergarten or 9 or 10 years old, they might see somewhere we have to be aware of how to minister and navigate our kids through a space where they're being exposed to things much earlier than in our generation.
The only thing I'll add to that, I was talking to a young dad couple of months ago and just sort of he was asking questions. And when I go back and think about the moments that are most impactful, it's moments when I stopped being distracted and had more direct conversation. So the ability to engage your kids and other kids
right.
in meaningful conversation, we sometimes don't realize how important that is. So I had to admit to my daughter, who just graduated from law school, that, when you were young and you were in that swinging chair, the NBA playoffs were on over your right shoulder. So, so I wasn't, and I joke about that, but there's something actually meaningful about that I missed opportunities
right.
to engage. And so it's almost like you, by being very intentional.
Yeah, you're going to have to turn that phone off and that game. And I didn't get that till my daughter got to high school and somebody had a conversation like you. And I became intentional when my daughter would come up and sit down that I turned the TV off because it was God saying, hey, she's wanting to dialogue and communicate. And this is your opportunity to really understand your daughter. And as he talked about at the beginning, build that strong relationship. And sometimes we think we are, but we're on the phone while we're talking or we're working. I mean, there's times I'm typing an email and I could sense that she could sense I don't have your full attention. And God had to convict me that, close the laptop. Dude, this 30 minutes, you can get back on, but this 30 minutes with uninterrupted time, undistracted time. So I think that's even more important of finding that through your busy schedule and all you do of saying, hey, we might have to sit on the swing, just me and her.
That's right.
No phones, no nothing, that's just right. Me and her talking about.
And the muffins coming out of that plastic oven are going to be delicious.
Car time's big. I have a friend who's a social worker here in Indianapolis at elementary schools, and she says that kids from stable households now show signs of neglect regularly just because of the phone. Like every kid cites the phone that's been very convicting of me as a parent for sure. So why don't we're about out of time. So Don, Greg?
I guess my closing comment is a little plug for Citizen 7. Our new theme for 2025 is choose the harder road.
It is.
And the harder road is saying yes to picking somebody up. Mm-hmm. It's not comfort. It's not isolation. It's not staying with somebody that's your same color, your same age, same neighborhood. whatever that means to you, pray the good Lord says, Lord, show me what my harder road might be. And I've really gotten that from our conversation. I'm so grateful that both of you could join us.
Well, we are grateful for you and grateful for
you
Citizen
guys are doing. Yeah, what you're doing. Thank
I
you.
just wanted to echo that. When Don and I started mentoring, I told Don that it was out of gratitude for his friendship and love for me that we then were able to mentor kids within the KIPP system that they gave us, but it was for Don. And so it's out of gratitude that I sense of you then being generous with your time and talent and treasure. And that's what we're trying to build in our city, is a sense of gratitude for what we've been given by God and with each other as we grow that spirit here and move forward. My final comment is, I think you can rename 100 Black Men, because Don and I are signing up. 100.
We take everybody. We take everybody.
It's now officially 102 Black Men.
We take everybody
Of Indianapolis,
and we just enjoy the opportunity. So all are welcome. So
Why don't you two share a last thought, please?
I would just say I continue to be inspired by Anderson and people like Anderson and our friend Ed who rely on prayer, right? And to take that time to pray, to understand what God's will is for your life, is extremely important, because otherwise you might miss that blessing and the opportunity to be a blessing to someone else.
And I would just say, as Don said, let's continue to stay in prayer that God give me the unconditional heart that He has, because unfortunately we just live in a world that puts condition, and it's the demon that all of us have to fight when we get up, of this world that says, hey, you get the glory. And we're every day trying to say, hey, God, how do you get the glory? And so I think if we say that prayer every day, as you said, I'm going to go home and say, hey, God, today, how can I do something that you get the glory instead of me getting the glory?
Yeah.
Thank you for listening and watching Big Hearted Indy here, presented by Citizen 7. We thank you so much for joining us today. Big things are coming here at Citizen 7, so make sure you sign up for the email newsletter at citizen7indy.com. That's the number 7. And just stay tuned. There's a lot coming, and there's great events like, if you're watching this, you've missed John Licklider, the former CEO of Lilly, coming and talking to everybody. You two might be familiar with him. And so you don't want to miss out on great events like that. So go right now to citizen7indy.com, sign up for the email newsletter, and we will see you again next month.